Hi guys, today I'm going to go over making a couple of feminine cards. I'm going to show you how to tie with twine on parts of your card, and I'm also using ribbon on one of the cards. So these are the colors that I picked. I got these from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using a pre-folded A7 card that came in a set with matching envelopes. So these cards are 5 by 7. And the colored paper or the pattern paper that I picked out was kind of flimsy. It's not cardstock. So for this project, I'm going to need to have something stronger, more heavyweight to put those papers onto. So I'm actually using a piece of cardstock that's just the 110 pound, and I'm cutting it down to 3 3/4 by 4 3/4, so it'll just leave a slight border around the edge when we put it on top of the card. So I'm cutting my colored paper down to that same size. So I'm cutting it down to 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. So it's just the same size as that cardstock. And then I'm going to cut this down the middle because I'm going to use the second piece on a card later on. So we're going to do that to the second pattern paper as well. We're going to cut it to 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. And then cutting it down the middle. I'm going to use the second piece later on. Okay, now I'm just going to need to secure this down to the cardstock that I cut out. Just put the glue around the outside edges. And stick it on there. You have to be careful when you stick it on the cardstock to just make sure that it's on there perfectly so there's no white showing through and there's nothing hanging off the end. It should fit exactly on there. So using the glue makes it easier to scoot it around. If it's not even, you can move it around easier. Okay, so we have both of our pieces down on the cardstock. And now I'm going to put the ribbon on. So I have some check gingham ribbon. I think it's about 1/2 inch wide. So I'm just going to measure it so it's sticking off the ends about 1/2 inch or so and cut it. And then I'm just going to put a tiny bit of glue down the middle, just enough to just hold it in place. You don't need a lot because you don't want it oozing up through the ribbon. So just put a little bit. And then we're just going to turn it around and fold the ends over and glue those down. You can put extra glue on the back, it's fine. So we'll just secure that down. Okay, so our front piece is all ready to put on the card. So we're just going to put the glue around the outside edges, not too much, just enough to hold it down. And then make sure it's centered so you can see an even border all around the outside edge. Okay, for this card, I got on the computer and printed out some different words. On this card, I'm going to put mother, and I'm making sure on the end of mother to put a space. There's a little bit of a space at the end of mother. You can see here. And that's because I'm going to use twine to tie around the end. And so I need a little extra space there so that I'm not punching into the actual word. I'm going to put pink background behind this. So I just have my pink cardstock. And I'm just going to cut an even border around the outside edge of that. Okay, and here's my hole punch. This punch actually does 2 tiny holes at the same time. The holes are too tiny to put the twine through, so I actually have to punch it a couple of times really close together to make the holes bigger. If you don't have a punch or something like this, you can actually just use an X-Acto knife to kind of make little holes if you need to. So we're just going to cut off a piece of this twine and thread it through. I like to give myself extra twine just in case, because sometimes when you're trying to push it through the hole, it kind of comes unraveled, and then you'll need to cut down a little bit more on the string so it's a tighter weave. So I always make sure to give myself plenty of extra string just in case I have to cut it down. And I'm just going to go around through both of the holes, and then I'm going to tie it in a knot on the end. You don't want to tie this too tight or wrap it around too tightly. You want to leave it a little bit loose so you don't damage your paper. You don't want it to crinkle your paper when you're tying it, so leaving it a little bit loose is probably the best way. Okay, we're just going to put that in just a regular knot. And then we have some extra long strings because we had extra twine, so we're just going to cut that off a little bit because we don't want them too long. Okay, I'm actually going to use foam squares behind this to give it some depth, to kind of give it depth and dimension. This will just lift it up like 1/4 of an inch off of the card. It just kind of looks cool to have a little bit of depth to it. And we're going to add a couple of black buttons at the top of the card just for some more personality. I think when making cards, when you have different textures and different things on them, it makes them that much more interesting. Then I'm going to go over the word with my Wink of Stella brush to give it a little bit of glitter, which you can't see on camera, but there's a little bit of glitter there. So there we are. There's our first card. And you could use this, you could put birthday or happy anniversary or anything on it, really. And this is our second card, which also we're using gingham. We're also using the A7 card, so it's 5 by 7. And on this card, we're actually going to cut a little bit off the end. So cut about 1/4 of an inch off the end. And the reason for that is we're going to tie twine around the outside edge. And in order for it to fit in the envelope, you need to cut a little bit off the card itself to start out with. So this piece is 5 inches by 5 inches. I pre-cut it off camera. We're just going to glue this down, making sure that because it's 5 inches, it's going to go right from the top right to the bottom of the card. So you have to be very careful to make sure it's all lined up along those edges. And then this is going to be our other part of the card that we're going to put over the top of the flowers. So this one I'm cutting at 3 inches by 4 3/4 inches. And then we're going to put a black background behind it. So we need to cut it at 5 inches. Excuse me. It needs to be 1/4 of an inch larger on each side than our previous one. So we're going to do 5 inches by 3 1/4 inches. And that will give us a small border around the outside edge after we put the gingham paper on top of it. Okay, we're just going to glue this gingham paper down to the black background. The black paper is actually the 110-pound cardstock as well, so it's pretty heavy. Just make sure your border is even all the way around. And it looks like I need to open some chips. Excuse me. Okay, so for this, we're actually going to do twine around the outside edge of this. Just up in the corner, I'm just going to punch the holes. And then like we did on the previous card, I'm just going to feed that through both of the holes around the outside edge and then tie a knot. See, I have to cut this one off like I was mentioning because it's coming unraveled. Okay, so we'll just feed that through and go around and tie it in a knot, not too tight. I'm actually going to leave the length on that one because I like how it hangs down over the card. And I'm going to use the foam squares to give this some depth. On something this big, you're going to want to put 5. You're going to want to put 1 on each corner and then 1 in the middle. Otherwise, the middle will kind of cave in. Eventually, it will always cave in. So putting 1 in the middle is a very good idea. Make sure that's nice and even. And then on this one, we're putting the sign that says hashtag best mom ever. And I've left a space by the hashtag because we're going to put the twine on that side of the sentiment. We'll just do a pink background, making sure that it's an even space all the way around. And we're going to do our twine on the opposite end on this card than we did before. And we'll just tie it in a little knot. And I'm going to actually put the foam squares behind this one too. So we're actually going to have 2 layers of height, so it'll have extra dimension. Looks awesome. Okay, on this card, so the reason why we cut it down in the first place was because I wanted to put twine around the outside edge. So that what I'm doing now is I'm punching the holes in the side of the card, and I'm actually doing 4 holes on the side. So instead of 2 like we did before. So I'm going to feed that through all 4 holes and then tie it around in a knot. So when we're finished and it's time to put it in an envelope to send away, it'll still fit in the envelope and we won't have any trouble because we cut it down in the first place. So this will just make things easier later on. Okay, now I'm going to get some green, it's called a bundle of sage, I believe, bundled sage ink, and I'm just going to go around the white part a little bit just to kind of smudge it up, kind of make it blend in with the green on the other paper, just so it's not so bright white. And then I'm going to use my Wink of Stella and go over my lettering just to give it a little more sparkle. Okay, there we are. So I hope you enjoyed making these 2 cards with me. I hope I was able to give you some good ideas. You can really use these cards for about anything depending on what paper you use. So please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and I'll put my Etsy store up so you can visit me.